Is there any way that that's a legitimate request to make to Ukraine? Don't go into NATO. And would that have changed what's happening right now, or would it change it from here with Putin? Is he reasonable in any way, or is he just headed all the way to Poland?
Well, I've always thought Putin to be the most rational, sensible player. Not a man, I'd like very much, but I worry with what he's doing now, whether he may have lost reason. He seems to have this idea that Russia will go back to the great days of Catherine the Great, the Tsarist Empire. I now do believe, given what he's done in the last 72 hours, that going into Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania is possible. And that is why right now, what the world needs is the American president to step up, to take the leadership of NATO and to say, this is our red line, and we absolutely mean it. And I'm really worried that if we don't do this, it gives a big signal to China to say, you know what, you can walk in to Taiwan, you can deny the Western world its semiconductors, you can bring our economies to a grinding halt. So this really is a big, big moment, and we need Biden to take control and take leadership in NATO.
Well, Nigel, when you have said what you just posited, that and I've seen other people say that Putin is not necessarily a madman, that he does things for his own self-interest. And you said years ago that if Ukraine continued to get closer and closer to the West, closer and closer to the United States, that was going to eventually result in some type of action, because it's right on Russia's western border. Do you think that it would be, I don't know, acceptable to ask a sovereign country to tell it what kind of alliances it can have and what it can't have? Or should we appease Putin? Should they have appeased Putin and said, okay, fine, you give us our sovereignty, let us manage our own future and fortunes, but we won't join NATO? Is that possible that they could have done that?
I have felt for 30 years, ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall, that we have made a huge geopolitical error. We absolutely promised the Russians that we would not extend NATO to the east, but we did. NATO, and in particular the European Union, sought to go further and further and further. The revolution of 2014 that brought down a democratically elected leader of Ukraine was done by people waving European Union flags, awash with funds from the European Union, who wanted Ukraine to join. And I quite understand why Ukraine might have wanted to join NATO, might have wanted to join the European Union, but it was for us to say, no, we're not going to do that, to understand the historic principle of buffer states, to understand the Russians have always been paranoid. After what Napoleon did, after what Hitler did, they've always been terrified of being invaded. And I stood up and said in 2014, we are poking the Russian bear with a stick, and I fear it will lead to Russian nationalism. We should have said, right from the start of this recent conflict, there's no way Ukraine is joining NATO. We would have taken away from Putin his casus belli, taken away from Putin his support from the Russian people who see themselves as being encircled. None of this, by the way, validates Putin's behavior, but we should understand just how wrong we've got this.
Well, that's a different notion entirely, that he wants to reconstitute the Soviet empire, because that conjures up all kinds of you don't know where. I mean, the Baltics, Poland, you don't know where it could go, and it sounds almost like it could usher in something horrific, something he alluded to the other night, something that history has never seen, or WW3. Any way you want to phrase it, it may be hyperbole, but that's a big difference from just securing what he thinks is the western border of Russia from encroachment by the West. And Ukraine has been pretty close to the United States in terms of weapons and everything else, right? He could make that case.
Yeah, look, as I say, I don't think it's the Soviet days that he dreams of. It's imperial Russia. This is the great romantic dream that Putin has. And I'm afraid that now that he's got as far as he has, it is difficult to call what the next move is. We have to be clear, absolutely clear, that if any infringement takes place on a NATO member state, we will and we are prepared to go to war. And let's remember one thing. He may have a big army, but technologically, his army, navy, and air force are very, very technologically behind where we are. There comes a point where if he thinks we're serious, he will stop.